Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Business Today Masterclass with the Dean of the world's top business school, Professor Srikant Datar. I remember sitting in Professor Datar's class, and his words ring loud in my ears. He said, "Don't be innovative when you're accounting, and don't think like an accountant when you're doing innovation and design thinking." It boggled my mind that there is a professor whose knowledge base is so wide and so deep that he teaches accounts, governance, and control. And at the same time, he also teaches design thinking and innovation. To my mind, those are completely different streams of thought which require a different mindset. And to have one person who can traverse these different streams is quite phenomenal in terms of what it will take to train your mind to be able to do that. To add to this, Professor Datar is a top expert on Africa. And while I was on campus, he was teaching an executive program to Africans on Africa. He's a Mumbai boy. Double gold medalist at the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad and at the Institute of Cost and Work Accountants of India. Professor Datar has a master's degree in statistics, economics, and a PhD from the Stanford School. This is the first time that Professor Datar is speaking at an Indian media event after becoming dean, so we're very happy to have him over here. And what makes this especially important is that we were in the last batch before he got promoted and became dean, so we've been in a class and there's a special connect, and I look forward to the opportunity of being able to grill and cold call my professor. So please join me in welcoming to this Business Today Masterclass Dean of the Harvard Business School, Professor Srikant Datar. It's fantastic, and thank you for taking out time from your holiday and joining us here.
A pleasure, absolutely a pleasure. And since you're going to cold call me, I might take the opportunity to cold call you too.
Oh, good Lord.
Rahul. So be careful what you wish for.
That sounds dangerous already. I am forewarned and very careful. So there's been so much talk, Professor Datar, about how the pandemic has changed the world as we know it. You talk to so many top professors, you've got students and executives from the world's top companies coming. Why don't you kickstart this conversation by telling everyone sitting here watching you live about how you think key management practices are changing? What are the big trends that you're noticing in management practices in the post-pandemic world?
So I'd say there's several things that have happened, and I was sort of fortunate that I started my term as dean right around the time, so it's in the middle of the pandemic and in the middle of an academic year. And no, I would not recommend that for anyone to be becoming dean, because each of those has some challenges. But what is incredible is the amount of opportunity that creates as well. So I spoke to nearly about 1,000 individuals, went on a listening tour for nearly about 4 or 5 months. And there were 3 things that emerged as big topics that people were saying are important trends that are coming. One was the focus on digital data work. And I would say that at some level, the pandemic accelerated by years the speed at which companies are now engaging in that work. We can talk more about that. So that was one major learning. A second was, and I've always been a vocal proponent of the fact that business is a force for good in the world. If you look at the number of people that have been lifted out of poverty, if you look about the products and services that we have created as business individuals, if you look at the kinds of jobs that we've had, it's been an enormous force for good. But right around this time, one looks at the challenges in the world, and yes, one will always look to governments to play a role, but there are some amazing opportunities that come from those challenges. And so the idea is, how should business begin to think about its role in society was a second big thing that happened. And remember, this is in the middle of the pandemic, where there's a health crisis, there's a social crisis, there's an economic crisis. So people were looking for what role can business play. And the third, of course, is the major trend that occurred in terms of the future of work. And of course, as in all countries, the great reset. some call it great resignation, others call it. How exactly should we be thinking about the way in which we would engage individuals inside organizations? So those were the three, I think, big trends that certainly I saw in my first few months.
The pandemic challenged all of us as leaders. Many sitting here would wonder, how do you think leadership styles need to change in a post-pandemic world? Because people now see the world differently.
Yeah.
To be able to motivate, align your workforce to achieve management goals, how do you think we need to change and evolve as leaders?
So I think, again, several trends that you can already see. So one of the important ones is a tremendous amount of focus on ESG issues. So it's already, people are yearning for more understanding of what is that role that business can play. You also see a much heavier focus on purpose, much more than we have seen in the past. So the idea, why should someone come and work for a company? What is their broader purpose? Of course, we always want long-term profitability, because without that, there is no sustainable business. But what is the broader purpose for someone to come and work? And I think from a leadership point of view, it has raised issues about resilience. So how do you build resilient organizations that are able to contend with the uncertainty that you were describing earlier? How do you act speedily? Because I think you can't now work at the same pace that you were working at before. So leadership in that, so agile, speed. And then just being very resourceful and adaptive. So I think it has caused the focus of leadership to shift in these ways because of the events that have transpired.
You mentioned the great resignation. I think one of the big issues managements and HR departments the world over are grappling with is trying to get the workforce back into the office.
Yeah.
Now that so many people are used to working in their pajamas, they see no point in getting ready, putting on a suit and a coat and a tie and showing up at office.
Yeah.
So is this the way you think it's likely to stay? What's your advice to managements trying to grapple with? You want those young, talented employees. You'd ideally want them back in the workforce, but that young, talented resource says, hey, I can be on a beach in Goa, I can be up in the hills in Leh. Why should I come to the Mediaplex?
You know, it's actually fascinating to think about what some of the data already shows. It shows, on the one hand, individuals wanting this flexibility that you were just speaking about. But on the other hand, it shows a desire for individuals to want to stay connected in some way to the work that they're doing. And of course, these are sort of contradictory in some sense. On the one hand, you want a lot of flexibility. On the other hand, you want some connection. And I think this is things that will, I think, work out over the next few months for sure, and perhaps next couple of years. But I think given this tension, what organizations are trying to think about is there some innovative way where you can actually respond to both? Mm-hmm. So, for example, organizations are thinking about anchor days. So where you get the ability to have this community that we're speaking about, but not necessarily everyone showing up at the office all 5 days in a week because of this flexibility desire as well. And I think there's a lot of experiments being run at the moment. And we know that even in very desirable jobs, when executives said, no, you have to come for all 5 days, people are saying, no, thank you. And how do you then create those cultures so that you can actually have people coming together and working together, providing this flexibility? And so individuals and HR managers are grappling with this idea about how do I have these anchor days so that people will come. But what is important is trying to think of those days, and this is a major HR challenge, I think, across all companies that we've interacted with, which is how do you have those days where it is attractive for someone to come? Even then, you don't just automatically say, yes, you'll come, although I think there will be a little bit of that push as well. But the pull of how do you make it attractive for individuals to come? So I think it's a there'll be many experiments run. I think at the moment everyone is saying, let's try a few different things to see how it'll work out.
In Iceland at this moment, there's an experiment which is being watched the world over on a 4-day work day.
Yeah.
I'm sure everyone's sitting here saying, ye ho jaye to bahut acha hai. Do you think this is a pipe dream or could it be the new reality?
I don't think, certainly if I'm speaking about the US situation, it's not there yet. But if you're saying 4-day workday in the office, people would be very happy if that was the conclusion right now, if you were one of those who wants everyone to come into the office. So I think it's still the flexible workday is still the one, trend that is, I think, or certainly the dimension that everyone is trying to work toward. But it could come. It could become a 4-day work week. Certainly, you're seeing a lot fewer individuals showing up in the office on Mondays and Fridays. That I think we are already observing. But I don't know if you want to call that a 4-day work week because people are still expected to work on Monday and Friday, maybe in their pajamas, as you said.
What's your advice to people sitting here and watching you on how to deal with the great resignation? The fact that in lucrative sectors where job avenues are opening up, you now have a situation where people join. They could join, they may not join. They could seek an offer, get an increase on that offer, and leave in a couple of months. Like there's no sense of real loyalty. And managements are saying, but you're a critical part of our growth plans, and now suddenly you're gone. So how do you think companies should be dealing with this?
So I think you won't be surprised to hear me say this, that I think this is really a classic design thinking problem in the best sense of that term. It is how do you deeply understand exactly this tension that I was talking about in terms of flexibility on the one hand and the desire to have community on the other. And how do you design both the workplace, the work itself, the opportunities for development? That bar, I think, has been raised. And so I think companies, as we were discussing earlier, will continue to try to innovate to do that. I think companies are going to have to figure out ways in which the development of these individuals is going to be seen as more and more important. And where I'm seeing some companies already at the leading edge begin to think about it is how do you think about those development opportunities so that individuals see their careers rather than only their jobs. See, the more you are focused only on the job, all the things that you talked about are likely to happen. But if you can focus individuals on development and careers, the opportunity for you to say, therefore, and of course, first line managers will be very important. Everything is, all of these, I don't think you're going to get past this by just saying you have to show up. I think we know already from the data that that's not. Now, the only caution I would have there is whether this is a more temporary phenomena or is this more permanent. I definitely don't think it'll go back to where it is, but will it swing back a little more? We don't know. That's
so
something
we now have a situation where on the one hand you've got jobs which are being accelerated because of greater digitization, where there's immense demand. Anybody in that space is just very happy with the way things are. And then there are those who don't necessarily come from technical backgrounds, for whom computerization and digitalization isn't necessarily what they've done all this while. And their upskilling becomes very critical. But do you think that those who come from non-tech backgrounds now just have a disadvantage that you need to live with? Or what would be your suggestion on how they can actively upskill themselves in the absence of technical know-how?
So I would think it's a huge mistake if people think that just because I need to have technical skills, let's say humanities, skills of people are not important anymore. And I was mentioning in one of my reunion talks at HBS that one must always think about technology and people as two sides of a coin. The more you build technology, the more you have to think about what is the impact that's going to have on people. And I said in my reunion talks, and I'm of course very proud to say it here again, is that for me, much of that learning and understanding came from Gandhiji. I mentioned in my talk that my father was part of the freedom struggle, very much follower of Gandhiji. So we learned Gandhiji's 7 deadly sins, as a very important lesson to absorb. And so even as I think about some of the things that we're talking about, imagine what this would do. Science without humanity, potential for commerce without morality, potential for knowledge without character. And of course, I would also add pleasure without conscience. And then there are the other three that may not directly apply in this particular context. But I think it's crucial that every time we keep raising the bar on what happens with technology, you are at great peril if you ignore the humanity or the connection with people to occur. So that's on one side. So I think it's a huge mistake. And it's certainly at the business school, we are very careful, even as we are creating these new institutes for digital and data and design and business and society, we're very carefully considering how you think about people as well as technology. Technology is definitely going to keep going. In fact, it's going to go faster. What we have seen is going to keep accelerating. Think about Web 3.0. Think about what will happen in the metaverse. Think quantum computing, edge computing. So it's going to keep going, no question. I think it's a huge risk if we do that at the cost of people. That's sort of one. Second, there's a very interesting book that my colleague Sidal Neely and one of her colleagues at the University of Southern California, Paul Lenardi, wrote, which says that, of course, you've got to have a digital mindset now in terms of your leadership skills. But they call it the 30% rule. You don't have to be a real expert to the extent of 100% of knowing all these things. You don't have to feel like, oh my God, I don't have this skill and so I'm out. You actually don't need that. But then as you think about that 30% and you think about what does that do in terms of the ability to achieve better coordination, the ability to do better computation, the ability to think about change management, you can see already that there are so many elements here coming together. So I'm a big believer in the fact that even as these technologies go, management and thinking about people, which is almost always at the core of management, will still be, if anything, an even more important skill.
Each time I see you in action, whether it's in a classroom or speaking at this Business Today Masterclass, I wonder, how do you train your mind? Because accounting, and we've got the minister, Piyush Goyal, sitting here. He's a crack student himself back in the day. But accounting requires a certain mindset and discipline.
Yeah.
And on the other side, design thinking and innovation requires, at least from the outside, a completely different mindset and innovation. Because, you have a certain image of, like you taught us, the IDEO case.
Yeah.
So it requires a completely different kind of mindset.
Yeah.
How do you train your mind? What are the lessons you think everyone sitting here can learn from it?
So first, I think it's not as big a deal as you're pointing out, Rahul. I'd say I'll say two or three things as to why I think. First, there are many of my colleagues at Harvard Business School who would be like that. In fact, my dear friend and late colleague David Garvin, with whom I wrote Rethinking the MBA, started as an operations management professor. He was focused on, if you think about the leading work on quality that David did in the late 80s and 90s, it was all on that deep operational operations management issues. And then he completely switched to decision making and innovation and other areas of general management thought and principles. I think what is at the core is that you have a base by which you can actually go in different directions. And then there are two ways you can proceed. One is you go with your particular toolkit and try and address as many problems as you can with that toolkit. That's a completely reasonable approach to take. Or if you've prepared yourself in a broad-based way and you start looking at problems, you immediately see that there are a range of tools that you can use to address those problems. In fact, they can only be addressed with a range of tools. So often you might work with somebody else, and therefore, you'll have a Venn diagram. So you know a little bit of what the other person knows, they know a little bit of what you know, and you work a lot together so you can think about the broader context in which these problems reside. And I think what has been particularly true of the Harvard Business School is the general management orientation that we take. This basic belief that just looking at one particular part of a problem isn't good enough. You have to look at it in multiple ways. And so each will take a different form. In my case, it went into some different directions. Certainly my undergraduate training in mathematics at St. Xavier's College in Mumbai was very valuable in some of the work that I did in my research. But the idea that if you're looking at a problem and you're trying to think about where a solution might reside, it does tend to take you in very different directions. And what is fabulous, I think, about our experiences and my experience certainly is the willingness of the school to let you invest there. I think that's the key reason that many of us have this more broader, multifaceted approach, is that the school lets you invest in those areas over 4 or 5 year periods, because if you have, I think the most important thing in academics is to have a particular passion and curiosity for something. And if you're willing to follow that, it can take you in many different directions.
How strong are your Indian roots at this moment? I said we'll do a cold call. So if I were to question you in Hindi, would you be able to give a good response
No,
in Hindi?
I may not be able to give you a good response
आप कोशिश
in Hindi.
करोगे?
कोशिश तो कर सकता हूँ, लेकिन I'll give you the answer in English.
So try it. We said we'll try. I just hope you don't throw some multiple regression my way and say, okay, how do you crack this? But you worked at the Tata Administrative Services, right?
Yeah.
You were working with Mr. Tata.
Yeah.
When you look at what Indian companies do,
Yeah.
आपकी क्या सलाह होगी अगर हिंदुस्तानी कंपनियों को वर्ल्ड बीटिंग कंपनीज बनना है,
हाँ.
दुनिया में अच्छा परफॉर्मेंस करें लेकिन इससे भी बेहतर परफॉर्म करना है,
हाँ.
तो जो तमाम आप कंपनियों को एक्शन में देखते हैं, आपके हिसाब से हिंदुस्तानी कंपनियों को क्या और बेहतर करने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए ताकि वो विश्व विजेता बन जाए?
So it's a very important question, because I think attempts that Indian companies have made to move in that direction have been, moved and then taken. So it's not been as simple as, जा सकते हैं, कर सकते हैं. And I think it is a little bit about, naturally trying to appreciate the different ways in which, as you become more global, you can work. And I think because by the way, this is true for Japanese companies too. If you think about it, you can obviously give the counter example of a Toyota or Honda, but I can give you examples like companies like Nippon Steel and others that were at the very top that didn't. I think when the local market is very big, the automatic pressure for you to start going global is not as strong. And to become more global, you end up having to think so differently about what the particular context is that you are operating in, that it's a little more of a challenge, I think, for companies to do that. But I would say that certainly in my early years working with Mr. Tata in India, I still remember to this day, and fortunately he does too whenever he does come to visit us at the business school. And I spoke a little about it at my commencement speech this year, about how inspiring it was for us to think about Sir Jamshedji Tata and the way he set up the organization and the way in which the contributions to society were made from the trusts that owned the shares of Tatas and the profits, and how they were utilized, whether it's health, education, so many areas of social welfare. And then what is very interesting for me is when I worked with Mr. Ratan Tata, the problem I was working on was at that time, which I hadn't quite understood in as deep a way, was how do you share risk on the one side and create incentives on the other? And I probably wrote 4 or 5 papers in my academic career just based on that particular problem that he and I were thinking about in my early years. So I always attribute a lot of my career and early contributions to Ratan Tata's way of just framing problems in a way that got me very excited about certain types of tensions that exist that could benefit from more academic research.
You mentioned globalization. During the pandemic and even after, there's been a big debate about the future globalization takes from here. On the one side, you've got the argument that this is more about localization or regionalization, and companies want more resilient supply chains, and they look to go beyond China, and therefore countries like India have a big opportunity. The other argument, which is held very strongly by many professors at HBS, is that this is more talk. It's good for you guys to say this on TV. In reality, money will go where it makes sense for money to go, and that still it still makes sense for money to stay in China, and that's just the reality of value chains in the way that they're developed. They're so entrenched that it's not going to change. There may be some superficial change on the margins, but there won't be deep-rooted change. Which side of the argument do you come out of?
So I think there is no question that the current pressures are such. You've seen the disruptions in global supply chains that have occurred. And the need for, so you were talking earlier about uncertainty, and the need for resilience is causing a lot of companies to do much, much more in terms of trying to think about these alternative supply chains, if you will. And that's not just in materials, because that's the area that we are most obvious and most familiar with. But if you think about individuals and the opportunity for them to, get the right kind of skills that they need, you see companies like Microsoft and Google already investing heavily in developing talent, in reskilling. Of course, that's already needed for the new digital world, but they're investing a lot of talent in reskilling because it's a matter of, it's not just the return, Rahul, on the one side. Of course, that's true, and that it'll always be there. It's a matter of risk on the other side. So just like in all these decisions, how much risk are you willing to take when these possibilities are much more pronounced now that it might get disrupted than they were in the past? So I see definitely a trend towards more regionalization occurring in the short run. But like you said, eventually, and of course one never knows, both the geopolitical as well as the economic issues are such that you might see a more sustained period where there are, and by the way, the world has always seen this, right? Globalization has never been just one way up. It's come down. There have been significant periods of regionalization or deglobalization, followed again by reglobalization. So we may be in one of those periods where it is down at the moment. I think if you look over longer periods of time, I agree with you. It will probably continue. Globalization will continue. But the risks today are sufficiently pronounced that alternatives are coming up. But once these alternatives come up, if people think very innovatively about the kinds of alternatives that come up, they might start becoming attractive enough that you may not rush to it quite as quickly. So I'll give you an example of a project that we're doing at the Harvard Business School today on what's called the 110 Initiative. And the 110 Initiative is arguing, and by the way, I think there'll be opportunities in many countries that we might be able to do similar things. 1 stands for 1 million, 10 stands for 10 years. And the goal of the 110 Initiative, launched by 2 individuals, Ken Chenault and Ken Frazier, is to employ these individuals who do not have a college degree in living wage jobs in corporate America over 10 years. So you're going to employ 1 million over 10 years. None of them have a college degree. They only have a high school diploma and may have done a couple of years of community college, but if that, but certainly no degree. And what this research shows is that there are many companies that require college degrees in their jobs, which are actually not needed. IBM, for instance, 20 years ago or thereabouts, we just have completed a case on them. 90% of their jobs required college degrees. Today, when they actually look at the jobs, it's less than 50%. So if you believe, as I think most of us do, that talent in this world is much more evenly distributed than opportunity, you now suddenly, rather than keep looking for people who happen to have college degrees, you suddenly are opening up your talent pool to a large number of individuals who are talented, skilled, motivated, capable, but just because they don't have the credential are not really, getting that particular job. Well, that's going to change dramatically what the economics of is going to be. This is one of those where I think is fantastic for business and fantastic for society. And if we can figure out how do you select these individuals, train them, develop them inside organizations, so we have committed at the business school significant resources to figure this out, because we actually think it has major implications for the world, and the business school has an opportunity here to do things that will make the world a better place. And if we can get that done, now suddenly this feeling that anytime I want it, I need to get another educated person in another country at a lower cost will now get changed to saying, no, I can find someone locally at a much lower price, but who can actually do the job very well. So yes, there'll be these trends. Yes, long term it will be not go back to a low period, but temporarily I do sense next 2, 3, 4, 5 years a lull.
Naina Lal Kidwai is here. She was at your commencement address,
Yes.
and she told me that you spoke very passionately about your Indian roots.
Yeah.
And I often wonder, why is it that so many top CEOs in the United States, especially in Silicon Valley, are of Indian origin? And how is it, and I say this with no disrespect to professors of any other ethnicity or nationality, that how is it some of the biggest superstars of academia also happen to be of Indian origin? क्या बात है इस मिट्टी में?
देखो, आप जब देखते जो जाते यहाँ से, they are of a particular, it's so competitive to be here. इतना मुश्किल है you to get into any of these institutes that we're talking about, that you're already at some level. I say that, I think that most of us would say this, we basically won the lottery in our life, right? Because we just happen to go to places like IIM Ahmedabad. It doesn't mean that the next 180 people at the time I went were not as good as, just naseeb tha कि हमारा number आ गया. But of course there is that the talent that is going is of course very, very strong. You then work with, the amount that each of us has learned from our colleagues who are there, just like all of you learn when you're at the business school from your colleagues who are there, is enormous. So you're meeting wonderful people, you are given that opportunity, and of course you have a certain amount of curiosity, you have a certain amount of, you worked quite hard. You carry those skills with you when you go. I also think, and one should look at it in a more general way, I don't know if, in fact, that is completely, despite what I just said, I don't know if it's completely true, because as you know, in statistics, you always find these couple examples and you say, oh my goodness, this must be what is actually happening. Not always clear that that's the case. If you look at the total number of people who have gone and you say, yeah, you might see. Of course, you know the ones who have succeeded, and those are the ones that you always think about. But I think one has to be extremely humble about this and just recognize that we were extremely lucky. I think the most important part, in my own case, I would certainly say that I was privileged to have the parents I did. Again, did nothing to deserve them other than God's grace and luck. But, I grew up, my father was an academic, so I grew up in a very academic household, and my grandfather was a scientist and fortunately received the Padma Bhushan in 1964 he was the director of the Indian Council of Medical Research. So we grew up.
Padma stay in the family. So passed on generation to generation.
Again, I've often said that when I saw who else received it when I did, I didn't think I deserved it nearly as much as some of the others who were there. I thought they were amazing individuals. But just that it's you grow up in a certain way, and then that luck carries through. So I'd put it more to that, Rahul, than anything
A lot
else.
of modesty there. I want to throw this open to the audience for questions. So you can think of what question you have in mind. We'll send a mic across. If you were rewriting your book, Rethinking the MBA, Business Education at a Crossroads, and I think you wrote it in 2010, if you would write it again, what would the genesis of the book be? How are you rethinking the future of the MBA? What does an MBA from here on look like?
So I would still be as positive and as hopeful as I think we were in 2010 about the value of this degree, because it's just a different way in which you think. And I think the mistake that people make when they think about the MBA degree is just the knowledge that you get in different subjects. That is certainly true. But this ability to get things done, the ability to engage in different discussions and debates so that you're constantly learning how to learn, which I think is a huge part of what happens in MBA education, and making judgments all the time. You know, you're always making judgments, as you well remember, Rahul, when you were in class, always making judgments, and you're listening to other people's opinions and trying to understand what you just get. I mean, when I speak to the alumni, one of the things they say is that method of trying to, and this happens across MBA programs in different ways. We probably are at one end of that spectrum, but it just allows you to be so aware of different points of view that you get to understand the world so much better about what's coming than, you know, if you don't have that kind of training. And then the ability to deliver across and execute and get things done. I think so there'd be a lot that would stay. As you might recall in the book, we talk about knowing skills, doing skills, and being skills. And I still think those are very important. We just talked about being a little bit earlier. But I think where it would change now would be a little bit around what you asked me at the beginning. I think we had talked a lot about business and society, even in rethinking the MBA in 2010. We'd have probably talked about it differently now. And again, just thinking about issues like equity that we were just talking about, like climate, I think there are going to be some big opportunities for business in these areas. And then, of course, on what you had already asked me about digital and data.
How do you perceive the India story at this moment? If somebody looking from the perch where you are were to look at what the Indian government is doing, policy maneuvers, what more would you like to see beyond what is happening for India to be able to realize its true potential in your view?
No, I mean, I think you're already seeing a lot of, regardless of, you just look at long spans of history and you're already seeing it. Of course, it's a challenge. There are lots of challenges. But I think the issues that you and I were talking about earlier are all there. I mean, look at the amount of technology and entrepreneurs that are coming out of India at this point in time. In fact, I happen to have the privilege of serving on the board of governors of both IIM Ahmedabad and IIM Calcutta, and never at the time when I was at the institute would I see this many entrepreneurs coming out of those institutions. It's just staggering what's happening. That's all coming because there's a different environment that's being created, and lots of opportunities that people see. And the ecosystem, I think, is really important. That, you know, you think about, of course, regulation, you think about access to finance, you think about access to capital and talent and teams. I think you can see distinct changes over, certainly when I think about, you know, my class at IIM Ahmedabad and I think about the class that I see graduating now, very, very different. And in a very positive way. I think it's fantastic what's going on.
Can I cold call the minister, please? And get you to hear my question.
This cold call.
Hear my question. We get to hear from you, today. Minister Goel, on commerce, on industry, on railways. Can somebody just have a mic sent across? Do you want to reflect on your time at the Management Institute and how it helped you train your mind? Do you want to just?
I'll take a rain check on that.
ऐसा allowed होता है professor class में?
Your class, ना? मेरे class में हम बिल्कुल नहीं.
How do you think your time at the Management Institute, Minister, helped you train your mind? And what is it that you picked up from a classroom which you think is relevant for what you do as minister in trying to shape policy? Can we just have a mic brought across, please? Thank you.
Thank you. And it was very interesting to hear you, Professor, and your thoughts about India, the thoughts about the post-pandemic world. I've, of course, only been able to spend a few weeks at Harvard Business School, much as I would have liked to complete my program. But circumstances have not allowed me to get back to school. I think getting back to school only opens your mind once again. You spoke about Mahatma Gandhi, he never went to business school.
Yeah.
But his lateral thinking probably beats all that we would do after
Exactly.
a degree at
Exactly.
Harvard Business School.
Exactly.
So I think it's more each individual's ability to cull out of whatever education or whatever life's experiences are.
Yes.
I've always enjoyed academics. I've always wanted to pursue academics when I was in college or thereafter. So for me, it was a great experience to be at Harvard Business School. I went to boarding for the first time in my life. So that itself was a big excitement for me. Even despite the fact that those rooms were so small that I actually got somebody from Harvard asking me, are you sure you'll be able to handle that? But a great experience just to kind of open your mind to newer ideas, newer ways of thinking. And all education helps in your work, whatever each one of us here is doing.
Yeah.
I'm sure Rahul will be a better anchor after his studies at Harvard Business School. And I hope he'll do really well for the country.
Yeah.
And as each one of the students who works there, I also benefited tremendously from the short time I was there.
Yeah.
Most important lesson, if at all, I think I got back from the few days there was about peer learning.
Absolutely.
And I think both the case study method of teaching and the fact that you cannot evolve unless you are a part of that team, both within that small group in your within the group that's preparing for the next day, the class, and then the entire 600, 800 people, I don't know how many were there.
900
That whole
in that class.
dynamics was a great pleasure and a great learning experience.
Yeah.
So it's something that will have an indelible mark in my mind and my work always.
Yeah.
And I would look forward to getting back there.
We
and
look forward to
completing
having
my
you.
studies there.
We
See,
look
all
forward to
dropouts do really well. I mean, many of the dropouts do really well. And Piyush Goyal happens to be one of them. His son did go and completed
Dhruv
in
did,
fabulous
yes.
style.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Naina Lal Kidwai has a question. Ma'am, can we just have the mic sent across, please?
Thank you, Rahul and Dean Srikant Datar, who really did us proud at the commencement ceremony, which you just described, where he talked about the Tata Group. And my question is really around the repurposing of business. You mentioned about business and society. Are there some companies in some countries that are getting it better than others in this post-pandemic repurposing of business? And how does India score in that repurposing? Or is it too early to ask?
No, I mean, if you think about, I always say, if you think about what India did in this domain, I mean, the fact that, and obviously there's always issues around implementation and so on that we always have to worry about. But if you think that, you know, in our public companies, 2% of our profits are going to be dedicated to countrywide, dedicated to doing that, that's amazing. I mean, it does say that, you know, we do care about what bigger a role business can play. And we did that presumably because we felt that business, because of the way they do things, can actually make a difference in these areas, right? The skills that we have are such that it can be actually applied there. So I think, and I know there are, having read a little bit about this, there's criticism about whether it's done the full correct way or not. We'll learn, we'll get there. But that's I think it's a very bold move. It's one that has moved it in that direction very forcefully. But of course, you know, you'll always hear about companies that have done amazing things in terms of that, right? If you think about the US, you think about companies like Ben and Jerry's that have always worried about how they think about their impact on society. You think about, you know, Patagonia and what they have done in terms of the impact that they have. But I think it's it's getting more and more impactful for this generation. If I talk to our students now, talking about the difference that Rahul was asking about, they are driven by purpose in a very significant way. They really do care. Of course, you want to be sustainably profitable over a period of time. You know, when we launched these two new institutes at Harvard. One, the Design Data and Digital Data and Design Institute at Harvard, and the other, the Institute for the Study of Business in Global Society. So both were launched this year. Both we thought were important things for us to launch because we were, moving so fast that we couldn't have research go linearly when the world is changing exponentially. So that was the logic of why we did it. But we asked Satya Nadella to come and launch the institute, the Business and Society Institute. And Satya was superb in the way in which he described why what we were talking about a little bit during my commencement speech and what we are talking about now is so important, which is, if you think about long-term sustainable profits that a company should earn, and that's what he says he's unabashedly looking for. He says, if I want that, in his talk to us as to why we should do more in this area, and by the way, we're likely to introduce a small course in the MBA program. We're just in the process of beginning to think about how we might do that. He said there are 4 things that you should think about while you're doing this. Number 1, you must, every time you're doing that, see if your products can be inclusive. Because more likely, if your products are inclusive, that you'll have sustainable profits. Everything is connecting to sustainable profit, but you must have products that are inclusive. Second, you can't do anything that violates fundamental rights. And whether that is institutions, weakening institutions, or if it is weakening the ability of individuals to perform, it'll truncate what those long-term profits are. So don't do that. Number 3, don't do anything. The planet is going to have finite resources, so don't ignore what that will happen, because otherwise you're not going to be sustained. You'll have all the kinds of issues we are already seeing. And number 4, take actions that increase the trust that society has in business. And you just think about those and you say, yeah, it makes sense if you want long-term sustainable profits. So he says he has to keep pointing out why he's taking money out of today's profits in order to do these things, because they'll sustain profits over the long run. So I think this is something both because of employees, investors, the whole ESG debate, Naina, that you're familiar with, ESB movement that you're familiar with, whether you're thinking about that or employees or customers or suppliers or communities, they're just playing a bigger and bigger role in business. And I think it's all because it'll allow these long-term sustainable profits to continue.
Pradeep Gupta is India's top pollster. He also is an alum and has a question for you. In fact, there's a case study on him and his company, which just got published recently.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm a student of Professor from OPM 47 Unit 3.
Exactly, I remember. Yeah.
So, Professor, my curiosity is, if there is no pandemic, what is your views on, or rather pros and cons of offline classes and online classes? And also work from home and work from offices.
Yeah. So
and there is no pandemic.
Yeah, if there's
in those scenarios.
Yeah. No. In the non-pandemic scenario, what would happen? So I think what would have happened is, that's what I said. In these years, the acceleration that has occurred in these areas has been very sharp and quick, and it would have been much slower. But so I think if there were no pandemic, work from home would have taken a lot longer to happen, because we always would have worried about the downsides of it as being a very, very big concern, and so we would not have done it. So I have no doubt that. I also do believe that online education would have been a lot slower than what it is right now. But we talked a lot about the work from home. Let me talk a little about online education. I'm actually and Rahul and I had the opportunity to talk about this right at the start of the pandemic, when you had a group of us together talking about this topic. I actually think that online education is going to create some amazing opportunities for the world, because of the access that it quickly provides to people. I'll give you 2 or 3 quick examples of why that is wonderful. So if you think about how the pace at which someone learns and how they learn, it's not the same. Now, when I'm in class and I'm trying to explain, a particular rule or a particular policy in terms of how you should, finance something or account for something, you basically aim for a certain percentage of the class. Let's say 80. If you go too fast, you'll lose everyone. If you go too slow, you'll bore everyone. So you kind of figure out, how fast should you go? And you're constantly scanning the audience to test whether you've got that right.
And figuring out who's sleeping, who's not.
No, that I don't allow. So cold call coming for sure. Then, Rahul. So, but if you're learning at different paces, online allows you to really learn at your own pace in a way that in class does not. So I think that's a huge advantage of online. Second, it allows geographic distance as well as time to be, a friend. So there are individuals who are all over the world who cannot come to the business school because of various constraints. We're doing so many of our programs, whether it's GMP or AMP or any of our executive education programs, partly online, so blended programs, and partly in person. It just makes it a lot more convenient for people to come. And sometimes the topic is such, so I teach an online course on design thinking, it's so much better for someone to be at their work, absorbing the material that we are delivering and then actually implementing it at work rather than coming to HBS, keeping notes, then going back and figuring out what you want to do. So that's where a longitudinal benefit of online learning comes. And of course, I hope that over a period of time, one of the benefits and one of the major things that we're doing at the business school right now is the digital transformation of the campus. I hope that over a period of time, we will be able to, our mission is to educate leaders who make a difference in the world. That's the mission of the business school. And I hope with online, we will be able to share the privileges that we have with a lot of people all over the world. Because if in fact our content is something that is worthwhile and helps the world, we should find ways to actually do that. And as we continue to deliver on online approaches, that's what we'll aim to do. So I think both would have been much slower to the point you're making, Pradeep, but I think though that's part of the silver lining. Because of the pandemic, it's moving fast. I'm a big believer that we should do much more online, and we'll have to figure out work from home, as we were discussing
Shantanu?
earlier.
Just wait for the mic to come.
Hi, Professor. I had the privilege of being in your class. This whole topic of back to office, you mentioned about this whole tension, between flexibility and belongingness, both
Correct.
together.
Yeah.
Is there also a tension between choice and purpose? And I believe in a lot of the things that we've seen panning out, it's choice versus choice, organization's choice versus employee's choice, or at the best, it's organization's purpose versus employee's choice. The narrative has never been about organization's purpose versus employee's purpose. And is that the missing piece of how this back to work will pan out? So, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, particularly as I said, with the importance that this generation puts on purpose, it's something to, the point that you're making between individual purpose and employee purpose and organization purpose is really important, because it's the magnet that will cause someone to feel that, yes, whatever else is happening in my life, I am able to fulfill my purpose in a more powerful way by being connected, by being belonging, by doing things that I might not otherwise do. So, and I don't think that's the only thing that's going to make it work. As I was responding to earlier, I think there will be some, balance that we'll have to strike between. But it's a tool or approach or a mechanism that we should use. We should try to find ways by which, because it's good for business and it's good for us to do it, rather than only think about, automatically how people will come back. And I also think, as I said, that it will change over a period of time. I think there is a particular period right now where I don't think it'll ever go back. I don't know, 4-day work weeks, that's a question Rahul was asking about earlier. But I don't think it'll ever go back. But I think there will, and you're already seeing that actually to some extent. People are missing that thing. But the more you can get purpose in, the more likely it will be that people, and we have to, that's why I think of it as a design thinking problem. How do you think about what the employee really would appreciate and want that can then tap into, and we've always thought about that in management, right? It's all about people at the end of the day. How do you get people to do what they like in order to achieve organizational goals? So it'll be, I think, more experiments in that area. I think, but almost all my colleagues who do work in this area still say it's still a time for us to experiment. They are not prescribing at this point. We still need to learn a lot more.
So we're coming to the end of this masterclass. I have time for just a couple of last questions before we wrap up. That lady over there has a hand up very persistently, and for a while, can we have the mic sent across to her, please? So after this, we'll take one more question, and then you could just possibly catch up with the dean once we're outside.
Hi, Professor. This is Tripti, and my concern or my question is actually, we know every country's, base lies in MSMEs, micro, small, medium enterprises. And right now, if you talk about countries, we all are talking about startup ecosystem and innovation. I understand you spoke about Web3 and NFTs, which is taking a lot of investment these days. Mm-hmm. And of course, now every kid, whether clearing an exam or college or school, wants to start a startup and not go for practical experience before starting this. So I see a lot of challenge in future for countries where the focus is on startup, of course, which India I'm talking about specifically, and completely ignoring MSME aspect. Getting the right person is becoming so difficult. And on the other side, we are talking about unemployment to get jobs. And companies who want to employ people are not getting the right resource because they may be interested in starting their own things. How do you see how to deal with this situation for the country, overall? What do you think is coming, and what are we ready for this with innovation happening around?
So I'm, more positive about it, I have to say, for two reasons. One, that these things have a way of you always, again, is the statistics, the ones that you know about, that you think, the pool of talent here is so vast that if you can figure out what you're going to tap into and how you're going to tap into it, it's something that if companies worked hard at, they'll be able to do. And I always think that, one shouldn't think about the particular circumstance, but think about the trajectory. So, and we know this to be true, that yes, some people will work, then they'll do a startup. We know what is the statistics about startups. So if it were that simple, everyone would succeed. Most of them fail, we know that. Then you go back into the workforce and you've learned so much in that process that you're better off by the time you go back. And then so that's why I'm much more optimistic about this dynamic way in which the world is evolving, and that people have the courage and the guts to try this and, want to do it. I'm often asked by my students when I had the privilege of being faculty chair of the Harvard Innovation Labs before, so where my bias is already. But students would often come to me and ask me this question, exactly your question. Should I do this startup? Because the chances are very much that I'm going to fail. And if I had more time, I would have described to you one of those interesting conversations with one of my students, Stefan Bansal, who became the CEO of Moderna and led us out of this pandemic, but we don't have time for that. But I always encourage them, do it. If you are going to learn, just think about where you're going to maximize your learning. At that stage in your career, just maximize your learning. If it's a job, do that. If it's a startup do that. But be ready that it's not financial success that you're trying to build at that stage, but your own human capital. And if that's the better way to go, just do it.
Dinesh Bhatia is the group CEO of the India Today Group. I've seen him at least at 100 events. Never once before this has he suggested he wants to ask a question. So Professor Datar, you've clearly inspired Dinesh. Go for it. Can we have a mic sent across to Dinesh, please?
Thank you. No, just a short one. I just wanted to know, do you see any big change in the way businesses are valued besides sustainable profits, which are always drivers of valuations? Do you see any elements becoming more important or any elements becoming less important, or any big changes?
So I think if you think about what I think sustainable profits obviously, but the other aspect of it is always risk. And the question that besides the cash flows that are the sustainable profits is how risky are those flows? And some of what is happening, whether you're thinking about things like environmental risks, or you're thinking about other socio-economic risks, people are paying more attention. I don't think it's fully in the valuation, but people are paying more attention to how we should think about those risks as we value. And I think that sort of direction will continue, Dinesh. I don't think that, and it's an important thing, because at the end of the day, you do want to figure out what the risks are as you're looking at those returns. And so as those risks are changing, it's appropriate that they are valued.
And the gentleman sitting there has come specially from New York. He said he changed his travel plans to come and listen to the dean. So I'm going to give him the privilege of having the last question. So go for it. Ajay, I think your name is, right?
He came specially from New York, and I came specially from Boston to meet him in Delhi.
No, thank you, Professor. It's a privilege, right? I wouldn't have missed it for anything. I was in Bangalore yesterday, and my wife was traveling to Calcutta to meet her parents. I said, you go there, I'm going to Delhi to meet my
Oh, I'm in big trouble with your wife for sure.
so we'll deal with her later. But thank you. So I'll go back to our popular, topic on the evening about work from home, right? So everything's great, fantastic. People are working from home. But I see a bigger problem there, right? Like earlier, people used to travel 4 hours, 3 hours, in traffic, in trains, to get to office and work 8 hours. Today, they are working 14 hours, 16 hours. And productivity has almost doubled for organizations, right? So what do we see now for organizations? Organizations are taking this as, I'm getting more work than what I used to get earlier, right? So what does it mean to organizations, one? And secondly, what does it mean to people, humans, families, right? That's important. So.
No, I think that's clearly the other side of it. I think Microsoft has some analysis that they can do as to when you're there, and there was a study that they published where they are seeing this. And I think this becomes, coming back to this sustainable long-term situation, this becomes an issue for management now. And this is one more of those things where every time you're thinking about technology, never ignore the people side of it. Just because the technology allows that, we have to, as leaders of organizations, think very carefully about burnout that's going to happen as a result of that, work-life balance in a different way that needs to happen as a result of that. So I think it will be incumbent upon us as leaders to think about the topic you're talking about is a really important, complicated one. And I think, again, it's one of those things that in the early periods, you don't think about it. But I can assure you at the moment, a lot of companies are thinking about this because for the same reason that you're describing. So it's something that we ought to pay a lot more attention to.
Okay, so we are out of time on this masterclass. It's very rarely that you have a minister come, sit silently for so long, listen, absorb everything. We've had people come in from New York. We've got people standing through the period. So you've obviously inspired people to be here, and hopefully they've benefited from your talk. I just want to
Rahul, before you close,
yes.
I think you have some people from hospitality and travel, and it would be good for you to ask them a question, since they are most affected by what has happened in terms of Corona. We saw them cutting back and then having to deal with the deluge of the summer vacations and not being able to deliver. So this start-stop economy, which is really difficult to find a rhythm in business. I'm asked that question, but I don't know, Mr. Sikka or Mr. Shringi, whether you want to add to this.
I think
Hi, thank you so much, Professor, for doing this today. It was
Pleasure.
extremely informative. I think just adding to what Kali said, we've seen this in multiple places right now, that while we've had the great resignation, we've also had people unwilling to come back. I don't know if you got the chance to see this today. For the first time, an airport, Heathrow, came out with an advisory to airlines to say not to book more than 100,000 passengers a day. So I think seeing these kind of environments, we've had industries like ours, which is travel and tourism and hospitality, which have been through fits and starts.
Yeah.
One big challenge which has been there is in terms of building employee culture and employee morale in an environment like this,
Yes.
right? So how do you really go about building culture? And culture anyways is hard to do. And then you spoke about, providing employees with a higher purpose.
Yeah.
How do you do this in a virtual environment, right? In our organization, for example, we had people, a large number of people who joined who had never really been into office.
Yeah.
And then suddenly one day, when the floodgates open, they are all expected to be fully up to speed with what's happening around them,
Yeah.
right? So how do you go about building that kind of culture and environment where these kinds of disruptions are easily, or I wouldn't say easily, but at least are managed more effectively by companies?
So I think this is this balance that we were talking about earlier, and by the way, this is a common, yours is a more extreme example for all the reasons that Kali you were mentioning and that you were describing. But this is a problem that most companies are facing it in some form or the other. And this is why I think trying to think about how do you get this balance correctly, because it's impossible to think about culture completely virtually, because we are social beings in some sense. We like to interact. But if you look underneath the data, you do see evidence that actually people want to come together. It's right. They want both of these things. They're seemingly contradictory, can't happen. So will we change technology by which we can make this happen? Of course we will. So what are we doing in our classes, for instance, at the business school when we're doing it online? People will linger, because what used to happen when you went into class after you finished, you had 10 people come around your desk and you would be having a nice conversation with them. Zoom, you click and you're gone and it's over. So yes, we will do that, and there are water coolers and all sorts of new things happening. No substitute, I think, in my mind for the fact that how much, I think, is always going to be a bit of a debate as to how much you want. But I cannot see a situation where zero is the correct answer, where people are not coming back to do it. And I think the challenge comes back to the earlier question that was being asked, is how do you make it attractive for someone to come? What is it that draws someone to come? Because, and as I said, I still think this is a bit of a temporary thing. My own view is that it'll bounce back a little bit, because for the same reason that we are social beings and we will want to come back at some level. You don't want to come back 5 days a week, and so that's another discussion, of course. But so you have to be very, I would say, purposeful about how you're bringing people back. So some people said, I can save on real estate by half the people coming at one time and half the coming at the other. I think we already know that's not going to be the case, because culture-wise, that's not something that's going to work. How do you do it in a way by which people come together? And when they come together, they value coming together rather than, come together and I'm in my office and Rahul's in his office, and we might as well have been in our homes rather than in that office. So that's what I mean. How do you actually make that happen? And you will face that much more than others will, for the reasons that you're describing in your industry. But I also think that what happened in that industry over that period of time, yes, you'll again get disrupted in different ways. I don't imagine that it'll be nearly as bad, although, you read Bill Gates, he says, there'll be a time for another pandemic to come, and we better be prepared for that as well. So let's hope he's wrong on that. But he's often
Find your masks, folks. Where are they?
Keep them.
Abha?
Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
And to give the vote of thanks, I'd like to just call on stage. We've got with us Nikhil Singha, Director and Head Top Tier Business at HSBC India. Nikhil.
Thank you, Abha. Professor Datar is a distinguished guest.
It's an honor, honestly. I mean, I am happy to state that I have a little bit of a thing to share with you. Also, one of the juniors from your institute, so that's the only commonality, and that's where it stops. But it was actually extremely enlightening. In fact, I did have a few questions, which I will possibly look at speaking with you offline. But one of the things that I was really actually very excited about to read, or hear actually, was about the point on resilient organizations you spoke about. And it actually resonated with the idea of linking it to the economic moats that, Warren Buffett most popularly spoke about. Yeah. And to say that how do you keep businesses competitive, maintain that edge in such a challenging environment, etc. So, well, that's a matter of separate discussion and probably catch up with you offline. But on behalf of HSBC, I'd like to really extend a very warm welcome. Naina ma'am is here, so we're actually her proteges in that sense. But it's an absolute privilege. I'm from the private clients business. I had that business for India. We manage close to about 1,600 families, manage about $8.5 billion of AUM. We do have some clients who actually we sort of manage in this group, but we're very happy to be partnering with the India Today group here. And I'd like to actually thank Kali as well for this opportunity to allow us to partner with the India Today group. And we'd be very happy to catch up with a lot of you offline. Our colleagues are here. They're all senior bankers from the industry, so we're happy to share our perspectives. And Professor Datar, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. So there's food. I think everyone sat through a long session, so please join us for drinks outside. Thank you. Thank you very much. This was a lot of fun.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely loved it.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.